Let's get an expert opinion, crossing to Scott Atran.
Scott Atran.
Scott Atran, anthropologist at the French National Center for Scientific Research.
Professor Scott Atran, an anthropologist and author of the book Talking to the Enemy, who spent a great deal of time in the company of actual Al-Qaeda and ISIL fighters.
So anthropology merges two, at least the way I was trained as an anthropologist, merges two currents of intellectual thought. One is a sort of humanistic approach, and the other is a scientific approach. Merging this participant observation, living people's lives, trying to understand them as best as possible, and then trying to apply some scientific rigor to communicating this to others is what anthropology is all about. Both things are lacking in our understanding, in at least my society's understanding of what is happening with the jihadi movement and even populist movements around the world. But there were very few actual studies with or understanding of people who do these things, like suicide bombers. So I had to go out into the field and meet them and talk to them and do experiments with them. And found out that, at least in the jihadi movement, they're mostly normal people. I mean, you know, you get a few weirdos, some really brilliant people and some really criminal types, but for the most part, they seem to span the normal distribution. And so the question was, how is it that almost anybody can become, you know, a jihadi? And of course, the argument put back to me, that's crazy, I would never become a jihadi. So, you know, you're just being an apologist for all this thing. But anyone who's anyone who's really done work with this, they all come to pretty much the same conclusion once they've actually lived with these people and talked to these people and spent time with these people. They're pretty much like everybody. So I look more at the patterns of how people come together, how they move in a path together towards this radicalized involvement in violence. And then trying to bring that back to policymakers who could use that information to make more sane policies.
There are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
So I go to the White House, for example, where since there were very few people who were actually doing this, they wanted to know. And so I was invited there several times. And I was talking to the National Security Council people, and I said, look, I talk to these guys. You want to know about them? You want to really know what's moving them? Why don't you talk to them? We can arrange that. And they looked at me like I was from Planet Fruitcake. They are full of preconceived ideas of who these people are, which have nothing to do with the reality of it. They have no sort of evidence-based reasoning to base their policies on, except those just developed in the abstract or from academics sitting, thousands of miles away who are just reaming in data and modeling. You just have a bunch of data and you find patterns, but the correlations can be completely specious and you miss the important things. A good example of that is the NSA is able to process billions of items of information, but they miss something as simple as a guy whose son has been radicalized, comes in and tells the Americans and anybody else who will listen, look, my son's going to do something, and no one pays attention to him because it's an isolated data point. But if you really had sort of a knowledge of the societies in which he's coming from and what he's talking about, then that, of course, would have set off alarms.